Thank you for joining us as we talk about how to communicate on the critical issue facing us today, and that is climate change. All substantial change is preceded by a mind shift of some kind, but we have to remember that information alone rarely produces what can be called transformation. Just because people know what you know doesn't mean they'll think what you think. We need to engage people emotionally as well as intellectually, and this can be difficult. We want to change attitudes and/or spur action, so mere propaganda won't work. Messages have to be non-dogmatic, grounded, and relevant to people's lives or emotions. Therefore, we need to know our audiences and who you are trying to reach. Now, before we get into the specifics about climate change communication, a few general observations about humans and how we often view issues. People are more likely to do things if they see other people doing them, even if it counters what they know is logically correct. People are easily persuaded by other people whom they like or respect or trust. And when it comes to problems, the bigger the numbers, sometimes the less people care, even if this doesn't make any sense. People are hardwired to understand our world through emotions and stories, not just facts. There is considerable research that shows guilt or shame is not a good long-term strategy to promote change. It's better to find common ground and start a conversation that could inspire change and highlight opportunity. We need to talk about values that we share, connect the dots to how that matters to climate and how that affects us. And then we need to talk about positive solutions that can make all our lives better. Trust in the information and its source is an important determinant of perception. A challenge for our times, obviously, because it's very easy to only get information and opinions from like-minded people. That's often called confirmation bias. So establishing trust is critical. Perceptions must be resolved before audiences can deal with the facts. And finally, repetition of a negative reinforces that negative. So I'd like to offer an important caveat about the current state of climate change discourse. We've entered a new stage of climate change discussions and activism. It's characterized, in my opinion, by two important distinctions from the past. One, I think there's more cross-generational conflict and hopefully opportunity. And two, there's legitimate and growing fear. Fear of the future, fear of inaction, fear of the ticking clock. Report after report says we have very few years left to act to prevent the really horrible from becoming horribly real. I don't think we really know yet what the role of this climate change fear will be in spurring on action. It may promote deep systemic change, or it could lead to overwhelming paralysis. Furthermore, there may be a marked difference in response by people with children and people without children. As you prepare to communicate about climate change, you'll want to know more about your key audiences and what you want them to do. Now, before you get into creating your key messages, you also need to think about the barriers that might prevent your audiences from taking action on climate change. Some of those barriers may be lack of awareness or lack of good information, active campaigns of misinformation on climate change, cost, location, perceived attitudes, accurate or not, about the issue, lifestyle, complexity paralysis, skepticism and trust issues, lack of power or perceived lack of power, solutions, yes, but not in my backyard, scientific illiteracy, and the legitimate fear of job losses. So here are some thoughts on challenges in climate change communication. People are highly motivated to avoid threats. If you're walking down a dark, isolated city street, you're vigilant for unexpected sights and sounds and probably pick up the pace to get back to a populated area as quickly as possible. If you step into the street and you see a bus bearing down on you, you jump back to the sidewalk. If people are motivated to avoid threats to their existence, why is it so hard to get people to act on climate change? Acting on climate change represents a trade-off between short-term and long-term benefits, which is the hardest trade-off for people to make. Ignoring climate change in the short term has benefits both to individuals and to organizations and businesses. In this short-term view, Individuals do not have to make changes in the cars they drive, the products they buy, or the homes they live in, if they ignore the influence their carbon footprint has on the world. Companies can keep manufacturing in low-cost methods if they don't have to develop new processes to limit carbon emissions. Governments might be able to save money today by relying on methods for generating power that involve combustion rather than developing and improving sources of green energy, even those that are cost-effective in the long run. And many effects of climate change are distant from most people. People conceptualize things that are psychologically distant from them in time, in space, or social distance more abstractly than things that are psychologically close. When there are weather disasters that are probably a reflection of climate change, like wildfires or extreme storms, they may happen far away from where most people live. As a result, most people are not forced to grapple with the specifics of climate change, but rather can treat it as an abstract concept. And abstract concepts simply don't motivate people to act as forcefully as specific ones do. Now, that having been said, extreme weather events are getting closer to home each year, as we've seen in the news recently. I'd like to now offer a few thoughts on key challenges you may face when communicating climate change, and then get into some solutions. I was lucky to work for years as an adult educator on environment and global development issues, and along the way I was very fortunate to participate in training offered by George Marshall, the founder of the Climate Outreach and Information Network. I'd like to thank him for some of the ideas and analysis we're about to explore and how to better communicate about climate change. Okay, so here is a top 10 list of challenges we faced in communicating climate. 1. A large body of research-based evidence suggests that climate change struggles to overcome human psychological biases against threats that appear to be distant in time and place, and the effects of the solutions may not be seen until much later. Humans are well adapted to respond to immediate threats, but slow to accommodate moving change. Climate change is a process, not a singular event. 2. People often form and reinforce opinions based not on science, but through social interactions with peers, emotive stories, values, etc. We also live in an era with active misinformation on climate change. 3. We interpret climate change through frames, which focus our attention but limit our understanding. They allow us to exclude or ignore meanings that lie outside of that frame. 4. Harm from climate change engages our moral brain, and many of us look for enemies. But, simplistically, climate change often lacks clear opponents. We all contribute to this problem, and we all stand to suffer the impacts. 5. The scope of the problem is complicated and overwhelming for many of us, and we have to deal with the "what on earth can my small contributions really do to help" response. This is a classic tragedy of the common situation. 6. Stats may be meaningless to many. What does 1 gigawatt hour of power actually mean? Also, low levels of scientific literacy can diminish understanding of the issues. 7. Fear of loss is powerful. Loss of jobs, loss of lifestyle, loss of convenience, money, etc. 8. Many political systems are based on roughly 4-year election cycles, so short-term thinking dominates. 9. For those already active on the issue, impatience for deeper action can be a barrier to support those incremental, smaller measures. And 10. A focus on adapting to climate change could affect the urgency of greenhouse gas emission mitigation and reduction. We need to bring the future mentally close, so people begin to feel the specifics of a daily life disrupted by a change in global climate. This will help reduce the psychological distance. Only when people experience this future threat in the present, rather than something that is still a generation away, will it have enough motivational force to get them to engage in actions that take more effort today. This isn't easy, of course. So here are 15 ideas that I think could help overcome the communications challenges I noted a few minutes ago. With an issue as large and far-reaching as climate change, we should emphasize that change is happening in the here and now, and that we should, and importantly can, create concrete solutions. In our day-to-day lives, we often say, "It'll be fine," even when we don't really mean it. When it comes to climate change, the first task may be to say, "It's not fine." 2, we need to recognize those moments of proximity that we can take action on. For example, improving the energy efficiency of our homes, changing our driving habits, etc. Exploiting bad news opportunities and weather events also create moments of heightened awareness. Preparedness and protecting your property and the people you care about could be an entry point for conversations about climate change. 3, we should make solutions as easy as possible, but not simplistic. 4, storytelling about the issue and the solutions is important. Follow effective narrative rules with recognizable actions and motives, causes and effects. Humans respond to good stories. 5, create a narrative of positive change in which our action on climate change does not just protect what is already here, the status quo, but can also open up opportunity for a better society through example, positive change in remote communities, green jobs for youth, etc. 6, resist the simple framing of the issue. Be wary of creating false equivalency with the frame of those opposed to climate action. Example, if we fight climate change, we might put coal miners out of work. At the same time, we need to be aware of our own frames and keep an open mind. Listen to people who disagree with you and recognize that they can be sometimes a source of insight. 7, while there are stands on the issues that we have to take, be careful that enemy narratives do not fuel division or cut discussions short. Whenever possible, build a narrative of cooperation that can bring people together around a common cause. 8, relate solutions to climate change to sources of happiness, social connections, social identity, and family. Research confirms that people are less motivated by money than we think. Money is sometimes a proxy for something else, progress, comfort, security, etc. 9, build trust. Be honest about our own roles in climate change and recognize that solutions aren't always easy. Recognize people's feelings of anxiety. The truth is that climate change is a far more complicated topic than most other issues. And we live in a time of considerable distrust towards experts, governments, big businesses, economists, etc. 10, climate change does not belong to environmentalists. It includes critical environmental concerns, of course, but it's bigger than that. Avoid language that stakes out climate change as the exclusive cultural domain of environmentalism. We need to close partisan gaps, understand people's values, and then come up with ways that climate change action can speak to those values. Engaging wider audiences is a critical component to being politically effective. 11, when talking about climate change, we also need to talk about health, about cool technology, family, comfort, quality of jobs. For example, energy efficiency at home not only saves money, it means healthier air quality, a cozier home, etc. 12. That having been said, the drop in a bucket argument is a hard one to deal with outside of the usual cliches of it all adds up, you set an example for others, etc. So you can try to shrink the bucket. Your drops would have a bigger impact in a smaller bucket. 13. Remind people that we have solved big challenges before. For example, the hole in the ozone layer. Promote the power of consumers and everyday citizens. 14. Play on pride. Use strategic peer pressure. For example, push the angle that your community can be a national leader on issue X or Y. And 15. Who the communicator is can be as important as the message. For example, we need to recognize the hard work of people in so-called polluting industries if we are to get them to consider a transition to a cleaner economy. Get non-traditional leaders on board. So we've been talking about how to frame climate change as happening in the here and now. But we've also talked about how to frame the idea that climate uncertainty can offer opportunities for good jobs, for youth, for small business, for First Nations. When appropriate, we need to place negative info in a narrative arc that leads to a positive resolution. Talk about solutions that are practical, viable, accessible, and attractive. And critically, especially for rural municipalities and towns, we have to situate climate change and the solutions in a local context. What does it mean for people here in this place? What opportunities exist for people here in this place? That's because we don't live in issues and we don't live in abstract concepts. We live in communities. Belonging is a fundamental and universal human need, and as a result, we often choose to conform to our group. That's why our friends and family often have more influence on our view than do experts. Before you talk about climate change, find out more about your audience. What are their values? What are their beliefs, their hopes, their challenges? What are the obstacles that they deal with? What makes them proud? These are the insights that will help your communications with them when you're talking about climate change. If you'd like to know more about the Clean Foundation, please visit us at clean.ns.ca. Thanks very much.